Thank you, Mr. Günther, for your kind introduction. Mr. Ambassador, dear colleagues from parliaments and universities, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank for this invitation and the opportunity to exchange some views on the present state and future perspectives of transatlantic partnership. And I'm very pleased that I can contribute the parliamentary perspective of this general issue. May I, before I start, ask how many of the participants this morning don't understand German? So I will do my best to express in English what I think in German. Ladies and gentlemen, this year 2014 is a year of commemoration of great historical events which took place during the last century. Not only, but also in the German Bundestag, we will have special events to commemorate that it's now 100 years since the beginning of the First World War and 75 years since the beginning of the Second World War, 25 years in autumn since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and 10 years since the entrance of Middle and Eastern European countries to the European Union. All these events have their own reasons, causes, and effects, but they all have a lot in common, if not being directly connected to each other. And for all these events, it's true that they wouldn't have happened without the participation of Germany and the United States in different roles, of course. The single most important result, at least the most sustainable result of the First World War, in my understanding, is the end of European dominance in international policy. The appearance of the United States on the international stage and the replacement of European superpowers, which no longer existed, by the United States. After the Second World War, the state of the United States has been shared with the Soviet Union for about 40 years until the end of the 80s. And then we had this wonderful, miraculous developments in Middle and Eastern Europe, including Germany, which resulted in the reunification of Germany and the unification of Europe, again, one being the precondition of the other. The reunification of Germany couldn't have happened without Europe coming together. And the reunification or unification of Europe couldn't have happened without the reunification of Germany. I don't have to explain that all these events from the beginning of the 20th century until the end, the famous short century, which in the explanation of the British historian Hobsbawm started 1914 and ended 1989, that all these events are directly connected to a prominent role of the United States. Insofar, and this is the reason why I began with this remark, we can't seriously, or should at least not talk on the transatlantic partnership without being aware of this political historical background. It doesn't make sense to regard this issue just in the perspective of the last months or even the last 10 years. We have to be aware that it has a particular and strong and remarkable history. Let me start with to some extent, statistical hints as far as the relationship between the United States and Germany within this concept of transatlantic partnership is concerned. We, of course, not only have regular, friendly, operative contacts on the top level of government and parliament, we more and more have regular, unspectacular contacts in the rank and files of both institutions. To illustrate what I mean, in the two last periods of our parliament, the 16th and 17th period of the German Bundestag, we had more than 30 visits of delegations of committees of the German Bundestag to the United States. This is significantly more than to any other country in the world, including our European neighbors. And beside this regular contacts on this operative level of getting in touch on financial questions, of trade questions, on foreign affairs, security questions, we have a steadily increasing amount of individual visits of individual members, far more than 100 visits per period of the parliament. And again, this illustrates that there is a strong relation, although most of these contacts don't have any spectacular public appearance. By the way, on the occasion of the visit of President Obama in Berlin last year, the German Bundestag passed a declaration to commemorate John F. Kennedy's famous speech in Berlin 50 years ago, addressing explicitly the promotion of transatlantic relations. And to be precise, this declaration has been passed with the approval of the, at that time, members of the coalition, Christian Democrats and Liberals, the Social Democrats, with the abstention of the Greens, and against the votes of the left. Whatever this means. I would like to refer to two unspecular, but in my understanding, very important agreements and programs we have since more than 30 years now. One is the Parliamentary Partnership Program between the Congress and the German Bundestag, being established in the early 80s, again in commemoration of German pilgrims going to the United States, having some participation in the founding process of the United States. Every year, about 350 young Germans and young Americans participate in this program, year by year, coming to Germany, coming to the States, spending a year, different to other similar programs, with a political part of the program taking part in Berlin and in Washington as well. So in total, in the meantime, we have more than 20,000 young people from both states which have participated in this program. And at the end of the 80s, we have started in Germany another additional program with a particular perspective of promoting and supporting the process of political transformation in the Middle Eastern European countries, at that time starting the process of transforming their countries politically, and offering young students from Hungary and Czech Republic and Poland and the Baltic states and several others the opportunity to come not only to Germany, but to spend some weeks in Berlin in a combined program of academic lectures and participation in offices of the members of the German Bundestag to get acquainted and familiar with the processes, developments, traditions of our political system in Germany. Fortunately, the United States accepted our invitation to participate in this program. Year by year, 8 American students participate in this program. So again, over the years, we had nearly 400 young Americans which have participated in this program. I shouldn't neglect the point that these two programs traditionally are under the sponsorship and the protectorate of the President of the German Parliament, and several efforts to find a similar regulation on the side of the American Congress failed. And it is probably not only a formal question that the responsibility on the American side doesn't rest on the Congress, but on the State Department. Drifting the Congress apart to some extent, not Germany. And to be honest, it's obvious, given the experience with different speakers of the Congress in the meantime, that the interest on the American side is not as vital as it still is on the German side. It's still true. I have some idea to explain why, but even regarding these points, it is still the fact which I am mentioning. And if my informations are correct, there's even a risk that cuts in the American budget could affect these programs on the American side. To conclude these remarks, we also have a regular exchange of members of our respective administrations, members of the German Bundestag, the administration of the German Bundestag, and staff people of the American Congress. In total, since the 80s, nearly 600 people from both sides participating in these programs. So there can't be no doubt that we not only have in rhetoric terms a strong relationship between Germany and the United States, participating in the great concept of transatlantic partnership. This is also and particularly true on the operative level, including in a specific way the German Bundestag and the American Congress. I don't have to explain that and why we have some irritations over the last months due to developments in the United States which affect not only Germany but also Germany. And that there is some speculation whether this is a rather, well, actual irritation without structural effects, or whether these experiences connected to the NSA and its activities could significantly, substantially affect the type of relationship we have. Before I try to explain why and to which extent this has an effect, my personal conclusion, and I'm of course talking not on behalf of the German Bundestag at the moment, but I am explaining my personal perceptions and perspectives. My personal perception is, yes, it will affect the relationship. It is definitely more than an actual development, which takes some time and then will be overcome. But it won't result in looking for an alternative, replacing this partnership by which one? And my feeling is that too much of the comments which have been written on this issue tend to conclude in one or the other exaggeration. Either that there is no alternative, so it doesn't affect at the end the relationship. Which is not true in my understanding. Or the other way round, it has an effect and therefore it will damage or even demolish the transatlantic partnership in general. To illustrate what I mean, I will quote some insofar representative votes or comments. My first quote is from Gerhard Schröder, the former Chancellor. Nobody knows exactly whether he was the first German Chancellor being observed by American intelligence sources, or whether he is already in a strong tradition. One of the few open questions in this respect. After it has been cleared that it was a misunderstanding that Angela Merkel has been observed since 2002, but that they just have changed the person under the same number of observation. Gerhard Schröder said in an interview, "Nein, ich habe das nicht für möglich gehalten. Die USA haben keinen Respekt vor einem loyalen Bündnispartner und der Souveränität unseres Landes, denn der eigentliche Kern des Problems ist bisher noch gar nicht diskutiert worden. Und das ist das ungeheure Misstrauen der Amerikaner gegenüber einem Bündnispartner, der ein hohes Maß an Solidarität gezeigt hat." I wouldn't have expected that this could have happened. The USA don't have respect for a loyal partner and the sovereignty of another country. This is the serious core of the problem, the unbelievable mistrust of the Americans against a partner who demonstrated a high amount of solidarity over the years. My point at the moment is not so much that this is precisely the ultimate comment. My point is this is a remarkable illustration of the effect which already has been occurred. Second quote is by President Joachim Gauck. Our Bundespräsident, very few weeks ago, said again in an interview, zwar sei die NSA nicht mit der Stasi vergleichbar, muss man mal klarstellen. Ja, da geht's schon los. Es sei aber inakzeptabel, dass auch seine Familienmitglieder und Freunde unter dem Druck der Affäre anfingen, jetzt wörtlich, sich am Telefon ähnlich zu verhalten, wie wir das früher in der DDR getan haben. Ende des Zitats. We shouldn't compare the NSA with the Stasi, but it is completely intolerable that even my family members and friends start to behave similarly as we have done during the time of the GDR. My last quote is definitely representative because it's part of the formal declaration of the newly elected government. And it is remarkable as such that this issue played a remarkable role in amount and in addressing the issue in the formal declaration of Angela Merkel starting the new period of the newly elected government just a couple of days ago. I will only quote out of more than 3 pages, complete pages of this declaration, some chapters. It has become clear, says Angela Merkel, it has become clear that the existing legal framework for preserving a reasonable balance between freedom and security is no longer adequate. An international framework does not exist yet. Second quote, can it be right that our closest allies, like the United States or the United Kingdom, gain access to all conceivable kinds of data on the grounds that such action enhances their own security and that of their allies? We ourselves, the argument goes, derive some benefit from it. Can it be right to cite as a reason for engaging in such an activity the fact that other countries in the world have been doing the same? Can it be right when the ultimate aim is no longer merely to ward off the threat of terrorism, but also to gain advantages over allies? For example, in negotiations at G20 summits or UN meetings. Advantages which over the years I have always found to be utterly negligible in any case. Our answer can only be no. These things cannot be right. They cannot be right because they affect the very essence of cooperation between friendly and allied states, namely mutual trust. Third quote, we are talking about this with the United States. I am convinced, Angela Merkel, that friends and allies must be able and willing to agree on the principles of their cooperation in all areas. Must be able and willing to agree on these principles of their cooperation in all areas, including international security, and do so in their own respective interest. The perceptions of the two sides are widely divergent at the present juncture. Last quote. I shall make it clear time and again that Germany could not wish for a better partner than the United States of America. The German-American transatlantic partnerships are of paramount importance to us and will remain so. This is the explicit version of what I have told you on this aspect. It is more than an actual crisis or irritation. It will affect the very substance of the relationship between our two countries, or to put it in other words, the transatlantic relationship will no longer be the same. But it will survive. It has to survive. And it is obviously in the interest of both sides to overcome these developments without pretending as if they wouldn't have happened. I have a lot of different sources of American and German newspapers, very, very intelligent and remarkable comments, which I won't quote because I'm at least as interested in communicating with your perspectives of these issues as you might be interested in getting my perception. So I will touch one question which seems to be one of the indispensable operative consequences of these developments, namely the question whether at all and which kind of agreement, formal agreement, should be found in order to conclude the developments which have taken place and to lay a new ground for the future relationship. Again, I'm personally not convinced that it makes sense to talk about a no-spy agreement. And I'm nearly sure that it certainly doesn't make sense to concentrate on this proposal as if it would be certainly the solution. My personal perception is, even if there would be such an agreement, which again I personally don't expect, even if there would be such an agreement, it wouldn't prevent both partners for good to make similar experiences in the future. And vice versa, I cannot see whether we shouldn't be able to develop a fully fledged partnership even without such a formal agreement. By the way, I guess personally that also for operative and legal reasons, it is unrealistic to expect such a formal agreement, because it probably would either be completely insufficient for the American side, or completely impossible in legal terms for the German side to get accepted mutually. So it was, in my understanding, not the best possible approach to the situation which has happened, to start the new procedure which precisely this proposal and concentrating on this issue as if this definitely would be the only acceptable solution. But it is certainly true that also, and particularly without such a formal agreement, we need some new understanding on limits on both sides, which have to be accepted and cannot have any kind of silent excuses or exemptions. By the way, I've read in any of these comments that we definitely need such a formal agreement, that only on this way we could make sure that nobody undertakes efforts in the respective countries which hurt the respective national law. Interesting speculation. Because the message of this speculation is, under the present circumstances, we have a situation in which regularly we don't accept those legal borders. Again, we are not just talking on some irritations. We are talking on a fundamental question of how we understand our respective role behaving as democratically controlled states and how we organize our cooperation in this respect. Ladies and gentlemen, last year, I think I can neglect possible fields of cooperation which are obvious: economics, security, regional questions, countries with not identical but similar interests for Europe and the United States. It's nearly obvious, and if you like, we can of course discuss on these issues during our debate. But I would like to conclude with a hint on a very interesting publication of the last year. The Austrian political science Anton Pelinka, now being a professor on the Central European University in Budapest, last year published a book with a remarkable title, "We Are All Americans." And in this publication, he explained the pretended and real differences between both regions and continents. Quote: Europa bildet sich ein, von Amerika so verschieden zu sein. Aber in Wirklichkeit ist es Amerika sehr, sehr ähnlich. Europe pretends to be very different from America. In real terms, it resembles America very, very much. Second quote: Dieses Europa, wie es sich im 21. Jahrhundert präsentiert, ist auch das Produkt amerikanischer Weltpolitik und insbesondere einer amerikanischen Präsenz in Europa. This Europe, to some extent, is a product of American policy and particularly a consequence of American presence in Europe. by the way, and vice versa. The United States historically are to some extent the product of European policy and European influence. So again, whenever you start to look on this kind of transatlantic partnership in historical terms, it's nearly indispensable, because neither one continent nor the other can be regarded without these contacts and cooperation and connections over centuries. What is new now? New is that, for example, in Germany, in Europe, the first generation has grown up which never recognized other political conditions as the present ones. Germany being united, being a member state, the greatest single member state of a unifying Europe, consisting of now 28 Western Europe, Middle European, Eastern European countries, with no biographic experience of the Cold War, of the separation of Germany and Europe, with no personal memories of the Berlin airlift, without which Berlin probably wouldn't have survived, without personal experiences of the decisive role of President George Bush Sr. to make the German unification coming true, tending to regard the present situations as being self-understanding. This is new. To some extent, it's also unfair, but it's real. And as politics has to do with realities, we have to face that this is a major part of the framework conditions under which politics takes place in the 21st century. So, addressing the title of my contribution, shared values, common responsibilities, different interests. Shared values, obviously, yes. Common responsibilities, well, not precisely the same responsibilities, certainly similar responsibilities, in some respect, definitely common responsibilities. Different interests? Of course. Of course we have different interests. This is absolutely not a new experience. Even all new is the experience that it is normal to have different interests from time to time. And what in political terms could be new is that Germany, not only but particularly after the new experience, feels entitled to follow its interests, like America does, without being prepared to define them. Thank you.